In today's video, I'm going to cover one of the most important chapters in Griot Par Sharra, entitled Yoga Karakas. The principles in this chapter revolve around the fact that a planet will become auspicious or inauspicious or indifferent dependent upon the house it rules. So for instance, Saturn for Libra rules the 5th house and the 4th house, and therefore is considered a favorable auspicious planet. These principles that are given in this chapter are one of the first things every student of Vedic astrology learns. Unfortunately, while it's such a common thing that people learn, it's something that is completely misunderstood, and therefore, even though people learn the principles, they don't use them. And if they do use them, they use them in the improper context. So today we're going to learn the principles of the fact that a planet becomes auspicious or inauspicious in the proper context so that we can use it. Now we know from Griot Par Sharra that there's cruel and gentle planets, benefics and malefics. And certain yogas ask for benefic or malefic to be doing something. So benefics and malefics are important consideration in yogas. It's a quality of a planet. Many yogas will ask for, require a certain quality of a planet to be there. So they'll say they want a malefic planet. Or they might say they want a watery planet. Or they might want a fiery planet. Or yoga might require a fire rashi. So these are qualities that yogas request in order for the yoga to be in effect. Okay? And one of those qualities is benefics and malefics. But when it comes to actually judging the horoscope and seeing if a person's going to produce and have something in their life or not, at that point Par Sharra tells us to minutely examine the planets and bhavas through the avashtas, which are the conditions of the planets. And those go above and beyond a planet being benefic and malefic. But it's not used in those avashtas are not used in the context of yogas. They're used in the context of judging bhavas in a very systematic way. And we're going to learn that system after this yoga judgment course. And then Par Sharra has this chapter entitled Yoga Karakas, which is the subject of today's video, where he tells us things like Angela lords, if they're malefic, are no longer evil, and if they're benefic, they're no longer good. And that trine lords are auspicious, and that the lords of the 3rd, 6th, and 11th are inauspicious. So people study these principles and they learn them. And it's such a neat idea that I think everyone wants to talk about them and learn them and teach them. But then nobody actually uses them heavily in practice. They might say, well, you're in the dasha of Saturn and you're Taurus Lagna, and Saturn rules the 9th and 10th, therefore it's going to be a good dasha. And like every dasha, it's good for some things and bad for other things, but it's not like a great dasha necessarily, because the planet's operating on so many levels. So when we use these sutras of determining the nature of a house lord, of a planet, based on what house it rules, we have to use it in the proper context. And what context is that? Well, some people try to say, well, Saturn's in the 7th house, but since you're Libra rising, it's good. And it doesn't work that way, okay? Because this is not to be used in the context of judging your marriage, your 7th house, okay? It's not to be used in the context of judging any bhavas. So an evil house lord for Libra, say for instance the 3rd and 6th, which is evil according to this chapter, is not going to hurt the house it's in just because it's evil. It's going to hurt the house it's in if it's in bad avashtas, just like every other planet. So some people try to use it in the context of judging bhavas and they completely fail and get inconsistent results, because that's not the proper context for it to be used. What is the proper context? The proper context is that of Yoga Karakas. Why? Because the chapter that he gives these principles in is entitled Yoga Karakas. It's not entitled Auspicious and Inauspicious House Lords. It's not entitled Auspicious and Inauspicious Planets. It's entitled Yoga Karakas, which is planet, which means produces of yoga. So So this chapter is about determining that which produces yoga for the person. Now, what does yoga mean? In this context, well, we know yoga means it yokes you to the results of your past karmas. It's a planetary permutation that yokes you to your past karmas, as we've learned. In this context, it's not, he doesn't name the yoga. He doesn't call the yoga Gajikasara yoga or Dana yoga or he doesn't give the yoga name. He just says yoga karaka, producer of yoga. When they say just that word, producer of yoga, then that's because it has no description, it actually means something specific and special. And what that is, it means it yokes you to greatness. It makes you a great person. So a lot of people call these Raj yogas. And so I called this little class Kendra Kona Raj yogas because that's what they're familiarly known as. You know, Kendra is angle, Kona is trine, Raj yogas. Angle, trine, Raj yogas. Because these planets that become yoga karakas are dependent upon them ruling angles and trines. It's all about angles and trines is the foundation of this chapter. But what we're really doing, you know, and people translate yoga lots of times simply into Raj yoga. And in a sense it can mean that. It can mean positions of leadership and rulership and power. But more specifically, it represents greatness. And greatness does not always come in the form of a leader, though. Okay? But it makes the person the greatest in their field or in what they're doing. It makes them a great person. So what this is really, these principles are really letting us do is to analyze the chart to see if there's a yoga, if there's a producer of yoga, which means a producer of greatness. Something there that makes the person great. Okay? Now, how many people do we meet? And how many people do we know who are truly great? The proportion is small because along with combinations that can potentially produce greatness, there's all these things that can get in the way of greatness. How many people do you meet and you say, if only they would be this way, they would be great? A lot of people, right? Where every time you think that about someone, it's because there's something getting in the way of that greatness. What is that? It's the evil lords. It's the evil planets according to these principles in this chapter that we're going to cover. So see, Par Sharra gives the auspicious planets, the evil planets, the indifferent planets, and the planets that will change their tendency depending upon who they're joined. Because there's planets that can produce greatness, there's planets that can get in the way of that greatness. Then there's planets that can support that greatness if they're with a great planet, or which will support negative, will support obstacles to greatness if they're with an evil planet. And then there's planets who are indifferent. Okay? And so everything in this chapter, everything that's given in the context of, everything that's given in this chapter about how a planet behaves depending upon it ruling a particular house, has to be taken into account of yoga karakas, of analyzing the planets that are producing yoga. That system is not meant to be used in the context of judging a bhava or judging a karaka. It's all about judging that person to see if they're great or if they have obstacles to their greatness, or if they have no greatness at all. So there's three types of people. There's great people, potentially great people whose greatness is buried in obstacles, which are self-made always. And then there's people who have no potential for greatness at all, meaning they have no yogas. So between these three types, there's the people with pure yogas, pure yoga karakas. There's those with yoga karakas that are disturbed by the evil planets. And then there's people with no yoga karakas, which have no potential for greatness. Okay? And so by studying this whole chapter is really devoted to seeing how amazing is this person? How great is this person? Now what does greatness define? Well, simply put, Greatness means they are inspired. They are inspired to live in accordance with the divine plan laid out to them. Okay? When you have that, you excel in what you do. You're happy no matter what happens in life. Okay? And that sets the foundation for liberation. Okay? Essentially, these yoga karakas, what they do, they cause the person to become active in their dharma. What is dharma? Dharma means nature. It's what's natural to each individual. Each individual has natural inspirations to be something. It's a natural inspiration. Does a person act upon that natural inspiration? If so, they're following their dharma. So if they're following their inspiration. And in doing that, they become great. Okay? And Krishna talks about the importance of following one's own dharma, which happens when there's yoga karakas, planets that make a person great. And that following one's own dharma, even though one doesn't do a great job with it, is better than doing another person's dharma perfectly. So it's more important to follow our own inspirations, even if we don't succeed in them, than it is to follow the dictates of another person or to follow the inspiration of another person. And in doing that, a person sets up a foundation for which liberation is the next natural step. Okay? Which means you're going to see these yogas for greatness, not only in amazing, great people who do amazing things, but also in people who have strong spiritual lives. Because without being able to follow one's innate nature, one's dharma, one cannot become liberated. It's just not possible. Okay? Alright, so essentially what we're doing here, we're seeing if the person is active in their dharma. And if they are active in their dharma, which means do they follow their inspirations no matter what's happening in their lives? And if they are, do they always follow it, or do they let other things get in the way of following it? Or do they instead follow other dictates? What are other dictates? Well, the other dictates, just to touch on it, are societal pressures, are dictates created in our own minds because of our misconceived perceptions of right and wrong, should and shouldn't. And also due to the fact that people do have debts to pay. And sometimes we have to pay our debts. We have to fulfill our obligations before we can go out and do the wonderful thing we want to do. Okay? And we're going to talk about that in greater detail. So in this chapter, Par Sharra focuses on helping us find out if a person has greatness in them. And if so, is that greatness restricted by something? And those are the evil planets that restrict it. And if there is no greatness, and even if there is, what are the other planets doing too? What is the person active in? Essentially is what this planet helps us see. Are they active in their dharma, which makes for a planet that produces yoga and makes greatness? Or are they active in kama, which is the pursuit of desires? Which in the pursuit of desires, no one becomes great. People do not become great in the pursuit of desires. Or are they active in the pursuit of material well-being? People do not become great being concerned with material well-being. Okay? Or are they active in pursuits of liberation? Okay? What are pursuits of liberation? Pursuits of liberation are essentially wanting to get away from the things of the world, to escape the pain, misery, and suffering of this world. Are they active in that? Now, if a person's active in the escape of the material suffering and the limitations of this world, that can go two ways. They can either do that by following their self, which means having yoga producing planets that make them strong in their following their dharma, or they can do it through other escapist tendencies, by just wanting to sleep all day, by having addictions, by not fulfilling their responsibilities, by not caring, by being on drugs, okay, by watching TV all day. There's all these ways that people can escape the pressures of their responsibilities in life and maintenance, okay? Even being in prison is a way. The 12th house, the moksha house, or freedom from worldly responsibilities house, also rules prison. Because when you're in prison, you don't have to worry about anything, right? You get fed, you get put in bed, you have a schedule, you just drift, okay? So there's a lot of negative ways. If a person's active in liberation, or moksha, which means freedom from material suffering, it doesn't always mean they're going to become emancipated, that they're going to become enlightened, all right? They only have a potential for enlightenment if, while being active in dharma, or being active in moksha, they're always active in dharma. If they're also active in kama, desire, they're not going to have liberation. Okay? If they're also active in material well-being, they're not going to have it. They have to be active in dharma. Just like Krishna states in the Gita, we have to follow our swadharma if we want liberation, true liberation, spiritual liberation. So in this chapter, he essentially lets us see how does a person, what is the person active with? Dharma, kama, desire, artha, material well-being, or moksha, liberation. What are they active in? And he focuses it being active around dharma, because that's what makes a person great. And that's the foundation of liberation. People who are active in other things are just going to have mediocre lives. There's no other way around it. Okay? So you can see what a profound chapter this is in Griot Par Sharra. And now you have to understand that you use these principles in the context of seeing the greatness in the chart. You don't use these principles in the context of anything else. Okay? So, in the next video, I am going to talk about these principles now that I've introduced the subject. And this is a vast subject that's going to take a lot of videos to cover properly. We have to learn how to see the yoga-producing planets, see the planets that are getting in the way of that, understand the subtleties for each ascendant. For each ascendant, there are subtleties to these principles. And then we also have to be able to determine the other things that the person's active in besides dharma. Okay, so this is a huge part of Par Sharra system astrology. And in this part, we can actually analyze a person's life in such profound, important ways that you can literally, in what you're going to learn in this chapter, you can easily spend a half an hour discussing with the client about some of the most profound parts of their life. It's a big part of doing that first reading for a person properly. Without using this, you can't do the first reading for a person properly, because if you really don't know what the person's active in, what is important to them, what they're chasing in life, what are they pursuing, dharma, artha, kama, or moksha, if you can't even understand that, how are you going to even deal with anything else in the chart? If you can't see their capacity for greatness, how can you even know what perspective to put everything else in? So these yogas we're going to learn in this chapter are critical for understanding the foundation of the chart, and they're also dasha dependent. So they also let you see the times of when a person's active in dharma more or active in kama more. Okay? So it's important for the foundation and predictions both. So in the next video, I'm going to cover the exact principles to seeing these yoga-producing planets and also seeing the obstacles to these yoga-producing planets. Thank you.